I'm Jessica Williams, 28 years old, and I never imagined my own parents would betray me so completely. My sister Amanda and I were close, but that bond was tested when our parents forged my medical records to force me into becoming her surrogate. The day I discovered those altered documents changed everything I thought I knew about family sacrifice and the limits of love. Looking back now, I still can't believe they went that far just to get what they wanted. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever had to stand up against family pressure, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength when those who should protect you become the ones you need protection from. Growing up in Lansdale, a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, our life seemed perfectly normal. My parents, Robert and Sandra Williams, were respected healthcare professionals. Dad worked as a hospital administrator at Montgomery General, overseeing several departments with meticulous attention to detail. Mom had been a nurse for nearly 20 years before deciding to become a stay-at-home parent when Amanda was born. She was always proud of her medical knowledge and connections, frequently reminding us how her expertise made her opinions more valuable than the average parent. Our childhood home was a spacious colonial with 4 bedrooms and a large backyard, where Dad built us a treehouse when I was 10. Every summer, we'd have family barbecues with neighbors and relatives, projecting the image of the ideal American family. From the outside, everything looked picture perfect. But even then, there were subtle signs of the control my parents exerted over our lives. Amanda was born when I was 4, and from the beginning, our parents had distinct expectations for each of us. I was the responsible academic one, while Amanda was the sweet, nurturing daughter. These roles weren't explicitly assigned, but they were reinforced through years of subtle praise and correction. When I wanted to join the debate team instead of cheerleading like Mom suggested, there were weeks of tension in the house. When Amanda switched from nursing school to business administration, Dad didn't speak to her for nearly a month. Despite these complicated dynamics, Amanda and I were close. 3 inches shorter than me with the same dark brown hair, but softer features, she was often mistaken for the older sister because of her nurturing personality. We shared close secrets and supported each other through the turbulent teenage years when our parents' expectations felt suffocating. Everything changed when Amanda was 19 and diagnosed with endometriosis. She'd been experiencing increasingly painful periods since high school, but our mother dismissed her complaints as normal female discomfort and told her to toughen up. It wasn't until Amanda collapsed during her sophomore year of college that she finally received proper medical attention. The diagnosis was difficult for her. The doctor explained that the condition causes tissue similar to the uterine lining to grow outside the uterus, creating painful adhesions, and in some cases, fertility issues. At 19, Amanda wasn't thinking about having children yet, but our parents immediately focused on that potential complication. Mom researched treatments, obsessively joining online forums and consulting with specialists, while Dad started a separate savings account for Amanda's future medical needs. Over the next few years, Amanda underwent 2 surgeries and tried various hormone treatments to manage her condition. I went with her to many appointments when our parents couldn't attend, holding her hand through painful procedures and listening as doctors explained her options. Through it all, our parents' primary concern seemed fixed on her future ability to have children, rather than her daily pain and quality of life. When Amanda met Brian during her senior year of college, our parents were immediately interested in his family medical history and views on children. Brian was patient and kind, with a steady job as an accountant and a genuine love for Amanda that was obvious to anyone who saw them together. They dated for 2 years before getting married in a lavish ceremony that our parents insisted on paying for despite Brian's more modest proposal plans. Almost immediately after the wedding, the pressure to start a family began. At every family dinner, Mom would casually mention another friend whose daughter had just announced a pregnancy, or Dad would send articles about declining fertility after 30. Amanda, then 24, confided in me that she and Brian had actually planned to wait a few years to build their careers in travel, but the constant pressure was wearing them down. When they finally decided to try for a baby, complications arose quickly. After 6 months without success, Amanda's gynecologist referred her to a fertility specialist, Dr. Patricia Moore. The initial test showed that the endometriosis had caused more damage than previously thought. For the next 2 years, Amanda and Brian went through increasingly invasive and expensive fertility treatments, from medication to intrauterine insemination. Through this process, our parents inserted themselves more and more. Mom would show up uninvited to appointments questioning Dr. Moore's recommendations and suggesting alternative treatments she'd researched online. Dad handled the financial aspects, insisting on paying for treatments that insurance wouldn't cover, creating an uncomfortable power dynamic, where Amanda and Brian felt obligated to follow their suggestions. I tried to be supportive without overstepping, bringing dinner when Amanda was recovering from procedures, researching options without pushing opinions, and most importantly, listening when she needed to vent. During one particularly difficult evening after a failed treatment cycle, Amanda broke down in my apartment. "What if I can't ever give them the grandchild they want?" she sobbed, clutching a mug of tea. "You see how they look at me now, like I'm letting everyone down." "This isn't about them," I told her firmly. "This is about you and Brian and what you want for your future. No one else gets a vote." But the reality was that our parents had always found ways to cast their votes in our lives, whether we invited them to or not. The breaking point came during Amanda's last appointment with Dr. Moore, when an ultrasound revealed significant uterine scarring. The doctor explained that pregnancy would be extremely risky for Amanda, potentially life-threatening. While there were other options, like adoption or gestational surrogacy, carrying a child herself was now medically inadvisable. Amanda was devastated, but also seemed relieved to have a definitive answer after years of painful treatments and disappointed hopes. Brian immediately shifted his focus to supporting Amanda's emotional recovery and researching alternative paths to parenthood. Our parents, however, refused to accept this conclusion. "We should get a second opinion," Mom insisted during a family dinner the following week. "Dr. Moore is too conservative in her approach. I know several colleagues who would take a more aggressive stance." "Sandra," Brian said firmly, using my mother's first name for perhaps the first time, "we've had 3 opinions already. Amanda's health comes first. We're looking into adoption agencies next month." "Adoption!" Dad scoffed, setting down his fork with unnecessary force. "You don't know what kind of genetic problems you might be bringing into the family. There are other options." As this conversation unfolded, I noticed my parents exchanging meaningful glances. Something in their silent communication made me deeply uneasy, though I couldn't have predicted what was coming next. At that point in my own life, I was 28, single by choice, and focused on building my career as a graphic designer at a marketing firm in Philadelphia. I'd recently been promoted to creative director and was managing a team of 5 designers. My apartment in Center City was small but stylish, reflecting my independent life. While I dated occasionally, I'd never felt the pull toward marriage and children that seemed to drive many of my friends' life decisions. This stance had always been a point of contention with my parents, who frequently commented that I'd change my mind when I met the right man, or warned that I'd regret prioritizing work over family. These comments always carried the implication that my life choices were temporary or misguided, while Amanda's more traditional path was inherently correct. The Thanksgiving after Amanda's final diagnosis was when I first sensed something shifting in my parents' attitude toward me. Throughout the meal, they kept steering the conversation toward family resemblances, mentioning repeatedly how Amanda and I had the same narrow hips, but good childbearing genetics from your mother's side. "You know, Jessica," Mom said while serving pumpkin pie, "family is about stepping up when needed. Your generation sometimes forgets the meaning of sacrifice." At the time, I brushed off the comment as another of her vague criticisms of modern values. I had no idea she was laying groundwork for what would soon become the most difficult period of my life. 2 weeks after that Thanksgiving dinner, I received a text from my father asking me to come to their house for a family discussion. He mentioned that Amanda and Brian would be there, and it concerned an important family matter. Given the serious tone, I rearranged my Sunday plans and drove the 40 minutes to my parents' house, wondering if someone was ill or if my grandparents needed care. When I arrived, everything seemed suspiciously formal. The dining room table was set with the good china we normally only used for Christmas dinner, and Mom had prepared an elaborate meal rather than the casual Sunday lunch I'd expected. Amanda looked uncomfortable picking at her cuticles the way she did when anxious, while Brian stared intently at his water glass. My parents, by contrast, appeared almost excited, Dad repeatedly checking his watch while Mom fussed with the table arrangement. "Now that everyone's here," Dad announced once we'd all been seated, "we wanted to discuss a solution to Amanda and Brian's situation." "We've already started researching adoption agencies," Amanda said quickly, exchanging a look with Brian. "Yes, dear, but we've found a better option," Mom cut in, reaching over to pat Amanda's hand. "Something that would allow you and Brian to have a child that's biologically yours." "We've been over this," Brian said, his usually calm voice tinged with frustration. "The risks are too high for Amanda to carry a pregnancy." "Of course." Dad nodded, his tone suddenly gentle in a way that immediately made me suspicious. "That's why we've been researching gestational surrogacy." All eyes turned to me, and in that moment, I felt as though I'd walked into the final scene of a play without having read the script. My stomach dropped as I realized what was coming next. "Jessica," Mom said, her voice taking on the sweet tone she used when asking for something significant. "You're young, healthy, and not currently in a serious relationship. You could be Amanda's surrogate." The room fell silent. I looked at Amanda, whose eyes were fixed on the tablecloth, then at Brian, who appeared deeply uncomfortable but said nothing. My parents watched me expectantly, as if they'd just proposed I give Amanda a ride to the airport, rather than undergo a life-altering medical process for the next year. "I'm sorry, what—" I finally managed, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "You want me to carry Amanda and Brian's baby?" "It makes perfect sense," Dad continued smoothly, as if he'd rehearsed this speech. "You share DNA with Amanda, so the child would still have a strong genetic connection to both parents. You're in excellent health, and the timing works well with your career since you can work remotely during the later stages." The casual way he discussed my body and career left me momentarily speechless. They had clearly been planning this conversation for some time, analyzing my life, to determine how a pregnancy could be slotted in like a project on a timeline. "I understand this comes as a surprise," Mom added, misinterpreting my silence. "But we've done extensive research. The process is quite straightforward these days. Amanda's eggs would be fertilized with Brian's sperm, and the embryo would be implanted in your uterus. You'd just be a healthy vessel for your sister's child." Just a vessel. Those words echoed in my head, revealing exactly how they viewed my role in this scenario. "Have you looked into professional surrogacy agencies?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "There are women who choose to do this who are properly screened and compensated. Those agencies charge upwards of $100,000, Dad said dismissively. And you never know what kind of woman you're getting. What if she doesn't take proper care of herself during the pregnancy? What if she has genetic issues she hasn't disclosed? With you, we know exactly what we're getting." Throughout this exchange, Amanda remained silent, though I could see tears forming in her eyes. Brian looked torn between politeness and the desire to end this uncomfortable conversation. "I need time to think about this," I finally said, knowing I needed space to process this unexpected request. "This isn't a small favor. It would affect my body, my health, my career, my entire life for at least the next year." "Of course, darling," Mom said, though I caught the flash of disappointment in her eyes. "Take all the time you need. But remember, Amanda isn't getting any younger, and neither are her remaining eggs. The sooner we start the process, the better the chances of success." The rest of the meal passed in awkward conversation about safer topics. As soon as I could politely leave, I made my excuses and drove straight to my best friend Taylor's apartment. Taylor, a labor and delivery nurse with a refreshingly direct personality, listened with growing outrage as I recounted the ambush. "They're out of their minds," she declared, pouring us both generous glasses of wine. "Do they have any idea what surrogacy involves? The hormone treatments, the physical toll, the emotional complexity, not to mention the legal implications." Over the next 2 weeks, I researched everything I could about gestational surrogacy. I learned about the extensive medical screenings, the daily hormone injections, The potential complications ranging from relatively minor issues like severe morning sickness to life-threatening conditions like preeclampsia. I read personal accounts from surrogates describing the complex emotions of carrying a child. You would not raise the challenges of navigating boundaries with intended parents and the physical recovery after birth. The more I learned, the more certain I became that this wasn't something I could do. My concerns weren't just physical, but emotional and ethical. What if I formed an attachment to the baby? What if there were complications that affected my future fertility? How would this change my relationship with Amanda and the child forever? Would my parents see me differently, reducing my value to my reproductive capacity? When I met Amanda for coffee the following weekend, away from our parents' influence, she finally spoke honestly. "I would never have asked this of you," she said quietly. "Mom and Dad came to us with the idea already fully formed. Brian tried to shut it down immediately, but they were so insistent, making it sound like the only option left." "How do you feel about it?" I asked carefully. She twisted her wedding ring, avoiding my eyes. "Part of me still hopes for a biological child, and surrogacy would make that possible. But not at the cost of potentially damaging our relationship or putting you through something you don't want. We're already looking into adoption. There are so many children who need homes." Her sincerity reassured me that whatever happened next, my relationship with my sister remained solid. The following Friday, my parents invited me to dinner, just the three of us. The setting was clearly designed to pressure me further. Mom had prepared all my childhood favorites, and Dad opened an expensive bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion. The subtext was clear: they expected my answer, and were certain it would be yes. "I've done a lot of research," I began after dinner as we sat in the living room. "I've thought about this from every angle, and I'm sorry, but I can't be Amanda's surrogate." The warmth that had characterized the evening instantly evaporated. Mom's smile froze, while Dad's jaw visibly tightened. "I understand it's a significant commitment," Mom said carefully, "but surely not as significant as Amanda's happiness, as her chance to be a mother." "Amanda's exploring other options, including adoption," I replied. "We've talked about it, and she understands my decision." "You've always been selfish," Dad said suddenly, his voice cold. "Always putting your career and independence ahead of family. What exactly would you be sacrificing that's so important? A few months of discomfort in exchange for giving your sister the greatest gift possible." His words stung, but I held firm. My body isn't a gift to be given away. I support Amanda and Brian completely, but not this way. I'm happy to help them research adoption agencies or professional surrogacy options. The conversation deteriorated from there, with my parents cycling through guilt, anger, and emotional manipulation. By the time I left, Mom was crying, and Dad refused to look at me. I drove home feeling both drained and relieved that I'd held my ground, believing naively that the matter was now closed. How wrong I was. The week following my dinner with my parents was oddly quiet. Too quiet in retrospect. Neither of them called or texted, which was unusual even during normal times. In our family, silence was often a punishment, a way to make the offending party feel guilty enough to cave. I'd experienced this treatment before for smaller transgressions, like missing a family event for work or dating someone they disapproved of. The silent treatment typically lasted a few days before Mom would call with some thin pretense, acting as though nothing had happened. This time, though, the silence from my parents was accompanied by an unexpected flurry of contact from extended family members. My Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, called to tell me how proud she was of my generous decision. My cousin Rachel texted, asking how I was feeling about the big commitment. My mother's college roommate Diane, who had always been like a second aunt to me, emailed a long message about her own difficult pregnancies and how the joy of bringing life into the world made it all worthwhile. At first, I was confused. These messages seemed to suggest I had agreed to be Amanda's surrogate when I had explicitly refused. I responded carefully to each person, saying there must be some misunderstanding without going into detail about the private family matter. But as more relatives reached out with similar comments, confusion gave way to suspicion. The turning point came when my grandmother called. At 82, she rarely used her cell phone except for emergencies, preferring handwritten letters for most communication. Jessica, dear. Her wavering voice came through the line. Your mother told me the wonderful news. I always knew you had a generous heart. She mentioned you've already had your medical clearance and everything looks perfect for the procedure. Medical clearance, I repeated, feeling a chill run through me. Grandma, what exactly did Mom tell you? That you're going to carry Amanda's baby, of course. She said you had your test last week and the doctor gave you the green light to start the hormone treatments next month. The whole family is so proud of you, sweetheart. After reassuring my grandmother that I loved her and would call again soon, I immediately checked my medical portal. I hadn't visited my doctor in nearly 6 months since my annual checkup. There were no unusual appointments scheduled, no test results I didn't recognize. Everything looked normal, yet my grandmother had specific details about medical clearance and hormone treatments. Something was very wrong. The next day, Saturday morning, I went to the local farmer's market to clear my head and figure out my next steps. As I was selecting tomatoes at my favorite produce stand, I heard someone call my name. Turning, I found myself face to face with Dr. Patricia Moore, Amanda's fertility specialist. I had met her several times when accompanying Amanda to appointments, but we weren't on a social basis. Jessica, what a coincidence, she said warmly. I was just reviewing your file yesterday. Everything looks great for the procedure. You must be excited to be starting this journey for your sister. My blood ran cold, but I forced a smile. My file, I'm not sure what you mean, Dr. Moore. I haven't been to your office. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. That's odd. I have a complete file for you with all the necessary test results and consent forms. Your mother brought everything over last week. She mentioned you couldn't make it to the appointment due to work commitments, but had completed all the preliminary testing with your primary care physician. I see, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. There must be some misunderstanding. Would it be possible for me to see this file? Of course, she replied, now looking concerned. Why don't you call my office on Monday to schedule a time? Patient confidentiality means I can only release it to you in person with proper identification. I nodded, thanked her, and somehow managed to finish my shopping before rushing to my car, where I finally let the panic wash over me. My parents had not only told the entire family I had agreed to the surrogacy, but they had somehow created a medical file for me with Dr. Moore. How was that possible? What tests and consent forms was she talking about? I called Amanda immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Can you meet me? I asked when she answered. Now, it's important. An hour later, we sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop far from our parents' neighborhood. Amanda's face grew increasingly pale as I recounted my conversation with Dr. Moore and the calls from family members. Jessica, I swear I didn't know about any of this, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. After you told them no, Mom and Dad said we should respect your decision and look into other options. They've been helping us research adoption agencies. At least that's what they said they were doing. Then why does Dr. Moore have a medical file for me? Why does the whole family think I'm going to be your surrogate? Amanda looked down at her untouched coffee. Mom still has connections at the hospital from when she worked there. And Dad knows all the administrative systems. Her voice trailed off as the implications became clear. Are you saying they might have forged medical documents? That's not just unethical, it's illegal. I said, the full weight of the situation sinking in. Amanda nodded miserably. I'm so sorry, Jessica. I never wanted this. Brian and I were actually relieved when you said no because we felt terrible about the position they put you in. We've been excited about adoption, but Mom and Dad keep pushing the surrogacy idea. That afternoon, I called my regular doctor's office and demanded an emergency appointment, citing concerns about unauthorized access to my medical records. On Monday morning, Dr. Samantha Lewis, who had been my primary care physician for 5 years, looked grim as she reviewed her computer screen. There's definitely been some unusual activity with your records, she confirmed. Several tests were ordered 3 weeks ago that I didn't authorize. Blood work, pelvic ultrasound, psychological evaluation. All supposedly conducted here, but I have no record of you coming in for these appointments. Who ordered them? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The orders were placed using Dr. Robert Miller's credentials. He's one of our staff physicians, but he's been on sabbatical in Europe for the past 2 months. She looked up at me with concern. Jessica, there's more. Your records show you've been cleared as a gestational surrogate. There's even a signed consent form in the system. I never signed anything, I said, feeling sick. I suspected as much. The signature doesn't quite match the one we have on file for you. She turned the screen so I could see the document. The signature was close to mine, but missed subtle details someone who wasn't me would never know. Can you tell who accessed the system to make these changes? Dr. Lewis typed something and frowned. The credentials used belong to a Sandra Johnson listed as a nurse administrator. Is that name familiar to you? Sandra Johnson. My mother's maiden name combined with her former job title. I felt the room spin slightly as the pieces fell into place. My mother had used her old hospital connections and knowledge to create a false identity in the system, forge test results, and create a medical history that didn't exist. What happens now? I asked, trying to keep my voice from breaking. First, I'm documenting this unauthorized access and falsification in your real medical record. I'm also filing a security breach report with the hospital administration. As your doctor, I strongly recommend you consider reporting this to the authorities. This is a serious violation of medical ethics and potentially criminal. I left the appointment with copies of all the falsified documents and a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. The people I had trusted most in the world, the ones who were supposed to protect me, had violated my privacy and autonomy in ways I couldn't have imagined, and they had very nearly succeeded. Armed with evidence of what my parents had done, I spent the next few days in a state of shocked deliberation. Part of me wanted to go straight to the police, but another part hesitated at the thought of potentially sending my own parents to jail. Despite their betrayal, the idea of being responsible for legal consequences against them was difficult to reconcile. I decided to confront them first with Amanda and Brian present as witnesses. Maybe I thought naively seeing the evidence laid out would bring them to their senses. Maybe they would apologize and we could find a way forward that didn't involve the criminal justice system. I meticulously organized the evidence I had gathered. Screenshots of the falsified medical records, copies of the forged consent forms with the signature that almost, but not quite matched my own documentation from my doctor about the unauthorized access and a timeline of events. I placed everything in a folder, made copies for everyone, and then called my parents to arrange a family dinner at their house. That sounds lovely, dear, my mother said, sounding pleased that I had apparently gotten over my selfish phase, as she had taken to calling it. I'll make your favorite lasagna. The evening of the confrontation, I arrived early to help set the table a normal family routine that now felt like an act in a surreal play. My hands trembled slightly as I placed the silverware in perfect alignment, rehearsing what I would say when the moment came. Amanda and Brian arrived next, both looking tense. Amanda had confided that she'd spent the past few days vacillating between anger at our parents and guilt about her role in the situation, however unwitting it had been. Brian, normally diplomatic to a fault, had dropped his usual peacekeeper stance and was firmly supportive of whatever action I decided to take. Dinner began with strained small talk. Mom asked about my work projects, while Dad inquired about Brian's recent promotion. No one mentioned surrogacy, fertility, or medical appointments, creating the illusion that this was just another family dinner. The tension built like pressure in a sealed container, unacknowledged but unmistakably present. After dessert was served, I took a deep breath and opened my bag, removing the folders I had prepared. There's something we need to discuss. I began, my voice steadier than I expected. I've discovered some disturbing information that involves all of us. I distributed the folders, placing one in front of each person. My parents exchanged quick, unreadable glances. What's this about Jessica? Dad asked, his tone somewhere between concerned and defensive. Open the folder, please, I replied, watching their faces carefully. As they flipped through the documents, I explained each piece of evidence. The unauthorized access to my medical records, the fabricated test results, the forged consent forms, the appointment with Dr. Moore that I never made, the family members who had been told I was already committed to being a surrogate. This is a serious violation, I concluded, not just of my trust, but of medical ethics and the law. For a long moment, no one spoke. Amanda stared at our parents in horror, while Brian's expression hardened with each passing second. My father's face had gone completely blank, a sign I recognized from childhood as his response to being caught in wrongdoing. It was my mother who finally broke the silence. "You're blowing this completely out of proportion," she said, her voice calm and dismissive. "We simply got the preliminary work done to save time. Of course, we would have told you before the actual procedure began." "Got the preliminary work done?" I repeated incredulously. "You forged my signature. You created fake medical records. You lied to our entire family. And you were going to tell me when exactly. When I showed up for an appointment I didn't make and found myself being prepped for embryo transfer." "Don't be dramatic," Dad cut in. "We know you, Jessica. You overthink everything. You would have spent months agonizing over a decision that should be simple. Family helps family. We were just removing the unnecessary delays your anxiety would have caused." His casual dismissal of my autonomy sent a wave of anger through me, so intense I momentarily couldn't speak. "This is so much worse than I thought," Amanda whispered, looking at our parents with new eyes. "You weren't just pressuring Jessica. You were planning to trick her into a medical procedure she explicitly refused. We were creating a path to give you the child you desperately want," Mom snapped. "A path your sister was too selfish to walk willingly." "Don't you dare put this on Amanda," I said, finding my voice again. "She and Brian have been nothing but respectful of my decision. This is about you, and your complete disregard for my right to make choices about my own body." Dad leaned forward, his expression shifting to the authoritative look he used when laying down final judgments in family disagreements. "Sometimes family needs override individual choices, Jessica. 1 year of your life in exchange for a lifetime of happiness for your sister. It should have been an easy decision." "It was an easy decision," I countered. "It's my body, my choice. And I chose no." "Well, it's too late now anyway," Mom said with a dismissive wave. "I've already told everyone in the family that you're doing this. Your Aunt Martha is planning a special surrogate shower. Cousin Emma has offered her vacation home for your recovery after the birth. Everyone is so excited about your generosity." The calculated manipulation behind these actions stunned me. They had deliberately created a situation where backing out would make me appear selfish and heartless to the entire extended family. "I want you to call everyone," I said firmly. "Today. Explain that there was a misunderstanding and I will not be a surrogate. Tell them the truth." "And humiliate ourselves," Dad scoffed. "Absolutely not." "Then I'll tell them myself," I threatened, "along with exactly how you tried to manipulate the situation." My father's face darkened. "You do that, and you can forget about being part of this family. I won't have a daughter who airs family business to outsiders." "Outsiders. These are relatives you've already involved by lying to them about me." The argument escalated rapidly. Mom began crying, claiming I was destroying the family with my selfishness. Dad threatened to cut me off financially, forgetting or ignoring that I had been completely independent since college. Amanda tried to defend me, but was shouted down by both parents. Finally, I laid out my ultimatum. "Either you tell everyone the truth and destroy all the falsified records, or I will report this to the hospital ethics board and potentially the police. What you've done is fraud at minimum and possibly criminal." The word criminal acted like a match to gasoline. Dad stood up so abruptly his chair fell backward. "Get out of my house! If you would threaten your own parents with legal action over a family matter, you're not the daughter we raised." As soon as I left, my phone began buzzing with notifications. My parents had immediately called several family members, spinning a story about how I had agreed to be a surrogate but was now backing out and breaking Amanda's heart. The messages ranged from gently concerned to openly accusatory. "Honey, are you sure you've thought this through? Amanda has wanted a baby for so long." "I can't believe you'd give your sister hope and then snatch it away. That's cruel." "Your mother is devastated. Please reconsider what you're doing to your family." Each message felt like another weight added to my chest, making it harder to breathe. The manipulation was working exactly as my parents had intended. To most of the family, I now appeared to be the villain in this story, the selfish daughter who had agreed to help and then changed her mind on a whim. Amanda called that evening, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "They're calling everyone Jessica, telling them you backed out because you're too focused on your career. Brian's parents just called asking what they can do to change your mind." "What did you tell them?" I asked, afraid of her answer. "The truth, that you never agreed in the first place, and Mom and Dad have been lying to everyone." She paused, then added softly, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea they would go this far." That night I hardly slept. Every time my phone buzzed with another message, I felt my anxiety spike. By morning, I had decided I would meet with a lawyer to understand my options. This had gone beyond a family dispute. My parents had committed fraud using medical credentials, violated HIPAA laws, and were now actively damaging my reputation among our extended family. While I had hesitated to take legal action against my own parents, their response to being caught had shown me they had no intention of acknowledging the gravity of their actions. Sometimes protection has to come before reconciliation. The following Monday, I met with Elaine Winters, an attorney specializing in medical law and patient rights. Her office was small, but immaculately organized, much like the woman herself. In her mid-50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses, she listened without interruption as I explained the situation, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "What you're describing is extremely serious," she said when I finished. "Forgery of medical documents, unauthorized access to protected health information, identity theft, and potentially attempted medical battery if they intended for procedures to be performed without your informed consent." Medical battery. I repeated the term unfamiliar. In legal terms, it's the unauthorized touching of a person in a medical context. If someone performs or attempts to perform a medical procedure without proper consent, it can constitute battery. Based on what you've described, it appears your parents were setting up a situation where you might have found yourself being prepped for medical procedures under false pretenses. She outlined my options, which ranged from filing a formal complaint with the hospital ethics board to pursuing criminal charges. The potential consequences for my parents were sobering: professional sanctions, loss of licenses or jobs fines, and even imprisonment in the worst-case scenario. "I don't want to destroy their lives," I admitted. "I just want them to understand they can't do this and for it to never happen again." "That's understandable." Elaine nodded. "Many victims of familial wrongdoing feel conflicted about pursuing full legal remedies. Let's start with a formal complaint to the hospital. That creates an official record of the incident without immediately escalating to criminal charges, though the hospital may be obligated to report certain violations to authorities." After our meeting, I went directly to Dr. Moore's office. With my identification in hand, I requested to see the complete file that had been created in my name. The receptionist seemed confused, but directed me to a private consultation room, where Dr. Moore joined me 15 minutes later. "Jessica, I'm so glad you came in." She began, looking genuinely concerned. "After our conversation at the farmer's market, I reviewed your file more carefully and noticed some inconsistencies that troubled me." "What kind of inconsistencies?" I asked. "The consent forms were properly signed, but certain procedural documentation was missing. And when I called your primary care physician to discuss a minor discrepancy in your blood work results, she had no record of ordering the tests or referring you to me." She hesitated, then added, "Your mother brought in the paperwork personally. She mentioned she still had access privileges at Montgomery General from her nursing days and had helped expedite the process." I took a deep breath and explained the situation as clearly as I could. Dr. Moore's expression shifted from confusion to shock to professional concern. "I had suspicions something wasn't right," she admitted. "The way your mother dominated conversations about Amanda's fertility treatments always struck me as unusually controlling. But I never imagined she would go this far." She shook her head. "I'll need to report this to the hospital ethics committee immediately and review all of our protocols for verifying patient identity and consent." With a formal complaint now filed with both Montgomery General Hospital and Dr. Moore's fertility clinic, I hoped the situation might finally be contained. I was wrong. The next day, as I was presenting a new campaign design to a major client in our conference room, the receptionist interrupted with an urgent message. My parents were in the lobby demanding to see me immediately. When I refused to leave the meeting, they had become disruptive enough that my boss Rachel was considering calling security. I excused myself and rushed to the lobby to find my father red-faced and shouting, while my mother tearfully explained to anyone who would listen that I was destroying our family over a simple misunderstanding. Several of my coworkers stood watching the scene with uncomfortable expressions. "What are you doing here?" I hissed, mortified by the public spectacle. "The hospital called your father this morning," Mom said accusingly. "They're launching an ethics investigation because of your complaint. His position could be at risk." "You should have thought of that before forging medical documents," I replied, trying to keep my voice down. "Please leave. This is my workplace." "Not until you withdraw the complaint," Dad insisted. "This is a family matter that should be handled privately." "You made it a professional ethics issue when you used hospital credentials to create fake medical records," I said firmly. "Now please leave before security escorts you out." Rachel, who had been watching from a short distance, stepped forward. "Is everything okay, Jessica?" "It's fine," I began, but my father interrupted. "Are you Rachel Thompson, Jessica's boss?" When she nodded cautiously, he continued. "You should know that Jessica is going through a difficult family situation right now and making some regrettable decisions. Her judgment is compromised, and anything she's told you about our family should be taken with a grain of salt." Rachel's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Williams, Jessica's work has been exemplary, and her judgment in professional matters is something I trust completely. Whatever personal situation you're referring to is none of my business, but I must ask you to leave our offices now. You're disrupting our workplace." After security was called and my parents finally left, Rachel invited me into her office. To my surprise, she was supportive rather than judgmental. "Family complications happen to everyone," she said simply. "Whatever's going on, just let me know if you need schedule flexibility or anything else to help you through it." That evening, I received a text from my father that chilled me to the bone. "You've made your choice. Don't expect us to protect your reputation in the family anymore. Everyone will know exactly what kind of daughter you really are." True to his word, by the next morning, my social media was flooded with messages from extended family members and family friends. My parents had apparently launched a full-scale campaign to discredit me, telling relatives I had mental health issues that were causing me to make false accusations against them. Some messages were concerned, others angry. One particularly painful email from my godmother suggested I seek psychiatric help for my paranoid delusions about my parents. The stress culminated 3 days later when I was preparing for an important client presentation. As I reviewed my notes, the text notifications on my phone wouldn't stop. My cousin had sent screenshots of a group email my father had sent to the entire extended family, claiming I was suffering from a nervous breakdown brought on by work pressure, and had fabricated allegations against them as part of my condition. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. My heart raced and I couldn't catch my breath. The room seemed to spin around me and a crushing pressure built in my chest. Convinced I was having a heart attack, I managed to call out to a coworker before collapsing in the hallway. I woke up in the emergency room with Taylor sitting beside my bed. The doctor explained I had experienced a severe panic attack, likely triggered by extreme stress. My blood pressure had been dangerously high, and they wanted to keep me overnight for observation. "I called Amanda," Taylor explained, squeezing my hand. "She's on her way, and Rachel knows you're here. She said to take whatever time you need, and your job is secure." Amanda arrived an hour later, her face pale with worry. She rushed to my bedside and hugged me carefully around the IV lines. "This has to stop," she said firmly. "What they're doing to you is unforgivable." "They're your parents, too," I reminded her weakly. "I never wanted to come between you and them." "You didn't. They did this." Her expression hardened with resolve I had rarely seen in my usually accommodating sister. "Brian and I have made a decision. We're cutting contact with Mom and Dad until they take full responsibility for what they've done. We've already told them." I was stunned. "Amanda, no. Your relationship with them is important, and they're excited about you adopting." She shook her head. "That was another lie. They've been undermining our adoption plans behind our backs, telling us the process looks promising, while simultaneously telling the adoption agency consultant that we're still exploring surrogacy as our preferred option." Her eyes filled with tears. "They've been manipulating all of us, Jessica, using my desire for a child to justify their control over your body. I can't be part of that even passively." That night in the hospital gave me time to reflect on the escalating situation. What had begun as an uncomfortable family pressure had evolved into medical fraud, public defamation, and now was literally affecting my physical health. Something had to change. The next morning, Taylor helped me pack a suitcase from my apartment. My cousin Sarah, who lived in Denver, had offered her guest room for as long as I needed it. Getting physical distance from the situation seemed like the only way to regain my equilibrium and decide on next steps. Before I left, I checked my email one last time. There was a new message from my father sent to my personal address rather than the family group. "Your actions have destroyed this family. Your mother hasn't stopped crying for days. The hospital board is questioning my judgment. Amanda and Brian won't speak to us, all because you couldn't make one sacrifice for your sister's happiness. I thought we raised you better than this. Don't contact us until you're ready to apologize and make this right." The complete lack of accountability, the continued attempt to place all blame on me rather than their own unethical actions, confirmed I was making the right decision in leaving. Sometimes the only way to end a toxic dynamic is to remove yourself from it entirely. Denver in early autumn was breathtaking. The crisp mountain air, the golden aspen leaves, and the majestic backdrop of the Rockies created an environment so different from Philadelphia that it helped me gain much-needed perspective. My cousin Sarah lived in a cozy two-bedroom bungalow in a quiet neighborhood where the loudest sounds were birds singing and children playing in nearby yards. Sarah, 5 years older than me and a psychology professor at the University of Colorado, provided exactly what I needed: space to process without judgment, a listening ear when I wanted to talk, and companionable silence when I didn't. She never pushed for details, but created a safe environment where I gradually felt comfortable sharing the full story. "Your parents' behavior shows all the classic signs of narcissistic family dynamics," she observed one evening as we sat on her back deck watching the sunset. "They view both you and Amanda primarily as extensions of themselves, rather than autonomous individuals with your own rights and choices." In those first weeks away, I focused on healing both physically and emotionally. I worked remotely, grateful for Rachel's continued support and flexibility. I found a therapist specializing in family trauma, Dr. Melissa Chen, who helped me understand that what I had experienced was a severe violation of boundaries that any reasonable person would find traumatic. The betrayal by those we trust most creates a particular type of wound, Dr. Chen explained. You're grieving not just the relationship as it is now, but also the relationship you thought you had and the parents you believed them to be. Through therapy, I began to recognize patterns that had existed throughout my childhood. The conditional love based on compliance with their expectations, the dismissal of my feelings when they conflicted with their plans, the way they had always pitted Amanda and me against each other in subtle ways, while presenting themselves as the ultimate authorities in our lives. During this period of reflection, I maintained close contact with Amanda through regular video calls. She and Brian had gone through with their decision to cut ties with our parents, focusing instead on moving forward with their adoption plans. "The agency has matched us with a birth mother in Oregon," she told me excitedly during one call. "She's due in February. We're trying not to get our hopes up too much since these things can fall through, but we've had several video calls with her, and it feels right." Amanda's strength and clarity continued to surprise and inspire me. Without our parents' manipulative influence, she seemed to be flourishing, more confident in her own decisions and less apologetic about her choices. Brian, too, appeared more relaxed, no longer walking on eggshells around his in-laws. 3 months into my Colorado stay, I received news from Montgomery General Hospital. The ethics investigation had concluded finding clear evidence of medical record falsification and privacy violations. My father had been suspended pending further review, and the hospital was implementing new security protocols to prevent similar breaches in the future. The report had also been forwarded to the state medical board for review of my father's professional license. Around the same time, several family members began reaching out with very different messages than before. My Aunt Patricia called first, her voice subdued and regretful. The hospital contacted me as part of their investigation, she explained. They showed me the forged documents with my name on them as a witnessing party. Jessica, I had no idea. Your father told me you had already completed all the proper procedures and were excited to help Amanda. I would never have supported this if I'd known the truth. One by one, relatives contacted me with similar stories. My parents had systematically lied to everyone, creating an elaborate fiction in which I had enthusiastically agreed to surrogacy, only to capriciously change my mind. As the truth emerged through the hospital investigation and Amanda's forthright accounts, family members began to see the situation for what it truly was. Not everyone apologized, though. Some relatives maintained that regardless of the methods, my parents had only been trying to help Amanda, and that family loyalty should have compelled me to comply. This divided response was painful, but also clarifying, helping me identify which relationships were worth preserving and which were based on toxic expectations. After 4 months away, I decided it was time to return to Philadelphia. While the distance had been healing, I didn't want to build my life around avoiding my parents. That would still be giving them power over my choices. Sarah hugged me tightly at the airport, making me promise to return for regular visits, regardless of the situation back home. My first week back, I arranged to meet Amanda and Brian for dinner at a neutral restaurant. It was the first time I'd seen them in person since leaving, and the reunion was emotional. Amanda looked more relaxed than I'd seen her in years, her smile genuine, and her eyes clear of the anxious shadows that had become so familiar. "We have news," she said, reaching for Brian's hand. "The adoption is moving forward. We're flying to Oregon next month to meet the birth mother in person." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "Have you thought about names yet?" "We're considering Sophia if it's a girl after Brian's grandmother. For a boy, maybe Daniel or James." She hesitated, then added, "We've also been talking about alternative options if this adoption doesn't work out. There are so many paths to building a family that don't involve the medical route. We're even looking into foster care certification." The way she spoke about these possibilities revealed a fundamental shift. No longer was having a biological child the only acceptable outcome. A change I suspected came from being free of our parents' narrow definition of family. As we discussed their plans, Amanda brought up the inevitable question. "Have you heard from Mom and Dad? They sent an email last week," I admitted, asking when I'm coming to Sunday dinner as if nothing happened. No acknowledgement of anything, no apology, just an expectation that we'll all return to normal now that I'm back in town. Brian shook his head in disbelief. "Classic. They're hoping if they ignore it long enough, everyone will just move on." "What are you going to do?" Amanda asked. "I'm going to respond, but with conditions. I've been working with my therapist on establishing clear boundaries. If they want a relationship with me going forward, there are things that need to happen first." I took a deep breath. Complete acknowledgement of what they did, a genuine apology, and family therapy if we're ever going to rebuild trust. The biggest challenge in those first weeks back was resisting the gravitational pull of old patterns. My parents attempted several strategies to bring me back into the fold without addressing the underlying issues. There were guilt trips disguised as health concerns. "Your father's blood pressure is through the roof because of all this stress." Appeals to family tradition. "It won't be Christmas without everyone together." And attempts to minimize what had happened. "Every family has disagreements. It's time to move past this one." With the support of my therapist Amanda and friends like Taylor and Rachel, I held firm to my boundaries. This wasn't just about the surrogacy issue anymore, but about establishing a healthy adult relationship with my parents, based on mutual respect rather than control and obligation. Work became an unexpected source of strength during this period. The crisis had forced me to be vulnerable with Rachel in ways I normally wouldn't have been with a boss, and she had responded with unwavering support. My team members who had witnessed the uncomfortable scene with my parents rallied around me with small gestures of solidarity. These workplace relationships, previously kept in a separate compartment from my personal life, became an important part of my support system. When the holiday season approached, I faced the first major test of my resolve. Thanksgiving and Christmas had always been non-negotiable family gatherings in the Williams household. Missing them would be a clear statement that things were not back to normal. "I'm thinking of hosting Thanksgiving this year," I told Amanda during one of our weekly coffee dates. "Just us, Brian, and maybe a few friends. A new tradition." She smiled. "I'd like that. It would be nice to have a holiday meal without tension for once." That Thanksgiving turned out to be one of the most genuine family gatherings I could remember. Amanda and Brian came early to help cook. Taylor brought her boyfriend Luke, who entertained everyone with stories from his work as a paramedic. My colleague Zoe and her wife Indira brought homemade chai and desserts from Indira's Indian family recipes. There were no carefully maintained appearances, no walking on eggshells, just good food and honest conversation. My phone buzzed several times throughout the day, with messages from my parents ranging from hurt, "We set your place at the table even though you chose not to come," to angry, "This is disrespectful to family tradition." I silenced the notifications and focused on the chosen family around me, realizing that this too was a form of standing my ground. As the year drew to a close, I received word that the state medical board had completed its review of my father's case. His medical administrative license was placed on probation for 2 years, requiring supervision and ethics training. He would keep his job, but with significant professional repercussions. My mother, though not directly sanctioned as she had been using falsified credentials, was required to complete community service hours and ethics education as part of the settlement agreement with the hospital. These consequences, while serious, were far less severe than what could have happened had I pursued criminal charges. I felt vindicated by the official recognition of wrongdoing, but took no pleasure in my parents' professional difficulties. The goal had never been punishment, but accountability and change. In this new landscape, I was finding my footing. Standing firm in my boundaries had cost me certain relationships, but strengthened others. Most importantly, it had reinforced my ownership of my body, my choices, and my future. Whatever came next, I would face it not as the compliant daughter seeking approval, but as a woman who knew her own worth and right to self-determination. As winter gave way to spring, I settled into a life that felt more authentically mine than ever before. My one-bedroom apartment in Rittenhouse Square, previously just a place to sleep between work and family obligations, became a true sanctuary. I painted the walls of peaceful sage-green bought plants that required actual care and attention, and hung art that spoke to me rather than matching the furniture. These small acts of creation helped me reclaim my space and, by extension, myself. At work, I took on more responsibility leading our agency's rebrand for a major healthcare client. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now applying my creative skills to the very industry that had been the backdrop for my family's betrayal. Somehow, this felt like reclaiming that narrative too, using my voice to shape how a healthcare organization presented itself to vulnerable patients. April brought the news we had all been waiting for. Amanda called, her voice breathless with excitement. "She's here. Sophia Grace arrived last night, 7 pounds 4 ounces. The birth mother is doing well, and all the paperwork is proceeding as planned. We can bring her home to Pennsylvania next week." The joy in her voice was unmistakable, a brightness I hadn't heard since before the fertility treatments began. Brian got on the phone briefly to share that Sophia had Amanda's nose somehow, and that they were both completely smitten. When they returned home with baby Sophia, I was among the first visitors, holding my niece, marveling at her tiny, perfect features, and the way her little hand wrapped around my finger. I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was joy, of course, and love at first sight for this new person. But there was also a quiet vindication. This beautiful outcome had happened not because of my parents' manipulative schemes, but despite them. Amanda and Brian had found their path to parenthood through honesty and respect for everyone involved, including the brave young woman who had chosen them to raise her child. Around this time, I received a formal letter from my father. The stiff lawyer reviewed language acknowledged the regrettable incident regarding medical records and expressed sincere regret for any distress caused. It mentioned the professional consequences both he and my mother had faced and stated that they recognized the seriousness of the matter. What it didn't contain was any personal accountability or genuine apology. The letter read like a corporate statement drafted to limit liability rather than a father speaking to his daughter. I shared the letter with Dr. Chen during our weekly therapy session. "What do you think they're hoping to accomplish with this?" she asked, setting the letter aside. "Closure on their terms," I replied after considering it. "They want to say they've apologized so we can all move on without actually addressing the real issues. There's nothing here about respecting my autonomy or recognizing how they violated my trust." "And how do you want to respond?" The question stayed with me for days. Part of me wanted to ignore the letter entirely, to show them that formulaic non-apologies weren't enough. Another part recognized that despite its inadequacies, the letter represented the first step my parents had taken toward acknowledging wrongdoing, however begrudgingly. In the end, I wrote back with equal formality, acknowledging receipt of their statement, and clearly outlining what would be necessary for us to begin rebuilding a relationship. A genuine apology that demonstrated understanding of the harm done, a commitment to respecting boundaries going forward, and participation in family therapy with a qualified professional. The ball was in their court. 6 months after Sophia's birth, my parents had yet to meet their granddaughter. Amanda and Brian maintained their position that until our parents took full responsibility for their actions and demonstrated real change, they weren't comfortable introducing them to Sophia. This stance, more than anything else, seemed to finally penetrate my parents' wall of denial. "Mom called me yesterday," Amanda told me during one of our sister brunches, now including Sophia sleeping peacefully in her carrier beside the table. "She was actually crying, asking when they could meet the baby. I told her the conditions hadn't changed. She said they're ready to do whatever it takes." This marked a turning point. The following week, my parents agreed to meet with a family therapist Dr. Chen had recommended. The first session was tense and difficult, with my father initially trying to frame the situation as a misunderstanding that got out of hand. The therapist, Dr. Kier Martin, skillfully redirected him to focus on specific actions and their impact rather than intentions. "Robert," Dr. Martin said calmly, "I understand you believe you were acting out of love for your daughter Amanda, but I'd like you to consider how your actions affected Jessica. Forging medical documents in her name took away her right to make decisions about her own body. How do you think that made her feel?" My father's struggle was visible as he confronted this direct question. For perhaps the first time, he was being asked to truly see the situation from my perspective, rather than justifying his actions based on his intentions. Progress was slow and nonlinear. Some sessions ended with genuine breakthroughs, while others devolved into defensive posturing. My mother proved more willing to acknowledge harm than my father, perhaps, because as a former nurse, the ethical violations resonated more clearly with her professional training. "I convinced myself we were just helping move things along," she admitted during one particularly honest session. "But the truth is, I knew Jessica had said no, and I chose to ignore that because it didn't fit with what I wanted. I violated not just her trust, but my own professional ethics. I'm deeply ashamed of that now." These moments of genuine insight were precious and fragile, often followed by backsliding into old patterns. The journey toward healing would clearly be measured in years, not months, but for the first time, it felt possible. Outside of the family therapy sessions, I continued to build a life that wasn't defined by this conflict. I started dating Michael, a landscape architect I met through a community garden project. When I finally told him about my family situation, his response was refreshingly straightforward. "That's seriously messed up," he said, his forehead creasing with concern. "No wonder you're so careful about setting boundaries." Thank you for trusting me enough to share this. His simple validation, free of any pressure to forgive or reconcile before I was ready, was exactly what I needed. Our relationship developed slowly and mindfully, both of us taking time to ensure we were building something based on mutual respect and clear communication. A year and a half after the confrontation, Amanda invited our parents to meet Sophia for the first time. The visit was brief and supervised with both Amanda and Brian present the entire time. My mother cried when she held her granddaughter, while my father seemed almost afraid to touch the baby, as if suddenly aware of the fragility of family bonds. I wasn't present for this meeting by choice. My own reconciliation process was moving at a different pace, and I needed to honor that. We had progressed to occasional short phone calls and carefully neutral emails, but I wasn't ready for in-person family gatherings yet. 2 years after I discovered the forged medical records, I received a handwritten letter from my father. Unlike the formal statement from months earlier, this was written on his personal stationery in his distinctive, precise handwriting. "Dear Jessica," it began, "I've been trying to find the right words for so long that I've said nothing, which is perhaps the worst choice of all. What I did was wrong. Not misguided, not excessive, simply wrong. I violated your trust and your bodily autonomy out of a misguided belief that I knew better than you what should happen with your life. The professional consequences I've faced pale in comparison to the damage I did to our relationship, and for that, I am truly sorry." The letter continued acknowledging specific actions and their impacts without excuses or justifications. He wrote about what he was learning in therapy, about respecting adult children's boundaries and recognizing his tendency toward control. It ended with a request, not a demand to meet for coffee if and when I felt ready. I read the letter several times, searching for the usual manipulative undertones, but finding none. It seemed my father had finally done the difficult internal work of facing his actions honestly. I texted him and suggested meeting the following weekend at a neutral coffee shop. The man who greeted me looked older and somehow smaller than the imposing father figure who had dominated my childhood. He listened more than he spoke, asked questions instead of making statements, and most importantly, didn't once suggest that it was time to move past this or put it behind us. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said as our meeting drew to a close. "I just want you to know that I'm committed to earning back your trust however long that takes." It was a beginning, not an ending. A first step on a long road toward a new kind of family relationship based on respect, rather than control, on love that empowers rather than constrains. As I approach my 31st birthday, I look back on the past 3 years with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the pain and breach of trust, but gratitude for the clarity and strength that emerged from that crucible. I've learned lessons that will serve me for a lifetime, that genuine love respects choices rather than demands sacrifices, that family obligation ends where bodily autonomy begins, that standing firm in your boundaries may cost relationships but will save your soul, that forgiveness is possible without forgetting or allowing further harm. Most importantly, I've learned that there is freedom in owning your choices and your body, even when those you love most try to claim them as their own. Amanda and Brian are now in the process of adopting a second child, a boy they plan to name James. Sophia, now a precocious 2-year-old with her mother's kind eyes and her father's curly hair, calls me Auntie Jess, and demands bedtime stories about brave princesses who rescue themselves. I tell her these stories with special care, knowing that someday she'll need to understand that her worth isn't tied to pleasing others, and her body is never anyone's to command, but her own. My relationship with my parents continues to evolve slowly. We meet for occasional family dinners, celebrate major holidays together, and maintain careful respect for established boundaries. The past cannot be erased, but we are writing a new story together, one page at a time. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure? How did you balance love with self-respect? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life accounts of finding strength in difficult situations. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply say no when everyone expects you to say yes.